Welcome in. It's Big Ten Today on a Friday. We are fueled by Gatorade. We are delighted to have you with us. Dave Rebson, Jerry DiNardo, and Dave Wanstedt. I missed the Friday night game last week. I'm delighted to have it back.
Well, it starts at 8 o'clock, so...
It's a little late for you?
Well, I'm not saying it's a little late. I prefer a 6 o'clock.
I'm going to tell you the truth. Jerry was in there setting his alarm on his phone to wake him up. He was not going to miss it.
He's got the alarm going off for the beginning of the second half.
Yeah, I mean, it's late. When it starts at 8, when's it going to end?
You're on East.
Probably around 11:30. Yeah. My experience tells me it's about 3.5 hours.
And Jerry's on Eastern time, right? So you're
I'm not.
He's Central time. This is a great misconception.
I'm 30 miles into the Central time zone.
We could definitely talk about the small portion of Florida that's in Central time for hours on end, but instead, let's get into our big story, and it does involve the game tonight. Both teams come in riding 2-game win streaks. Iowa's offense has been phenomenal in wins over Northwestern and Wisconsin, hitting the 40-point mark in both outings. UCLA has also found its footing on offense, scored 27 or more points. It was over Rutgers in Nebraska. This after they failed to score more than 17 in any of their first 6 games. So guys, I'm interested in your thoughts on these turnarounds as we look at the Gatorade game leaders. You see the numbers for these two over the last 2 games. It is a 10-point per game edge for Iowa over UCLA, but both of those offensive numbers are really impressive, and both have taken advantage of turnover problems from their opponents. Let's start with Iowa's turnaround, Wani. What has stood out to you as the Hawks have gotten going?
Well, you said the turnover thing, but I'll tell you what, we all know Kurt Ferentz. And as good as the defense has kind of come around and the quarterback's playing, I don't think anything could make Kurt more happy about this season so far than that offensive line, Jared, and how they're running the ball, right? I mean, that's his baby. And when that offensive line struggles and they can't run the ball, I mean, that's been a thorn in his side when that hasn't happened. So we know how much pride he takes in that. So that's to me been the biggest difference. And then I tell you what, Sullivan, you got to give Brendan Sullivan. That's another thing for the defense to worry about. Now they got him playing. He's not turning the ball over. Is he a dynamic passer? Probably not at this point. Is he a dynamic runner? Probably not at this point. But I'll tell you what, you got to defend the quarterback run game. That puts extra stress on the defense.
Yeah, Sullivan's connected to the offensive line. When you run the option as they do with Sullivan, and Tim Les has done a tremendous job with this offense. I mean, they've scored 40 points 2 of the last 3 games, or things that they haven't done. So the offensive line benefits from Sullivan being able to threaten the defense. And then Iowa's defense really didn't get off to a fast start.
Right.
I have to tell you, I watched the Iowa-Wisconsin coaching tape, and you get the end zone version as well as the sideline version. They played about as well as I've seen an offensive line play this year. I mean, above and beyond what you would say that their standard is. I mean, they really attacked Wisconsin. I mean, it was a thing of beauty if you're an offensive line guy.
And it all kind of works together because the offensive line was an issue last year. Now you've got an offensive line that is playing much better. Caleb Johnson is a phenomenal running back. Were it not for Ashton Jeanty, we would be talking about him certainly as the Doak Walker Award. We might be talking about him as a Heisman candidate. It just feels like from a running back perspective, Jeanty's been so good. Boise's such a good story that he's kind of taken all of the oxygen there from the great running backs nationally. But man, Caleb Johnson's been phenomenal. And Sullivan doesn't have to throw the ball. They just, as you say, Jerry, they just need to threaten the defense. I mean, they're first in the Big Ten in rushing. They're last in passing. But that's a sustainable formula given the way that Tim Lester's calling these games.
Absolutely, and it helps the defense. I mean, I loved coaching defense when we had a running game and a quarterback and an offense that didn't turn it over. Those guys are on the sideline. They're fresher. I mean, 14 takeaways this defense has, second in the Big Ten. And that's because, obviously, you're in the right spots. You're well coached. You're anticipating players. And maybe it's not great. They might not have the dominant guy. But, boy, as a unit, and that's the key, they play awful good.
But I can remember leaving camp saying that if the quarterback position comes along, they have a chance to be in the playoffs. And I don't even think they're ranked. I mean, I don't think people understand how good they are. I think the Wisconsin people do now. I mean, no, seriously.
It's a pretty clear message.
That was as good a game, I think, as Iowa's played in a long time.
Got to be excited about UCLA. I mean, I think back to the opening week, and you have these first impressions, and they struggled to beat Hawaii. And the conversation in our green room was, wow, that may be the worst team in the Big Ten,
right.
UCLA. They are clearly not now. What has changed, in your opinion, about the Bruins?
Okay, here's where it starts. They played Indiana, they played LSU, they played Oregon, and they played Penn State.
Yes.
Okay, so let's start there. Then Coach Foster gets the job February 12th, right? And Bieniemy, who's a West Coast offensive guy, takes over an offense that Chip Kelly was drastically different. So it took Eric a while to get through. And then Coach Malloy has been there 4 years on defense, but he wasn't the defensive coordinator. And that unit kind of came along first because he knew the players, he knew the system wasn't going to change. Eric Bieniemy, it was a drastic change in system. And Coach Foster, I think, has got his feet underneath him now a little bit. I think he knows the team. He probably relates to the team better now than he did when he first started. So the schedule really set him back. Absolutely. That's a tough schedule for anybody.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned Jerry Bieniemy. When I watch a game, and I'm watching last week's game, and I'm always thinking defense, anticipating what they might be calling. I'll tell you what, I was frustrated. I mean, he was mixing it up pretty darn good. And when Garber's the quarterback, when he runs, we're seeing him right here run for, he had 49-yard run.
Two really long runs.
Yep. I mean, if he takes off with the ball, he's not one of these guys looking to fall down. You better get him on the ground.
Right.
I had a lot of those, okay? but defensively, I don't know, Jerry, in my opinion, they just got to get some more better players there. They got a good scheme. They just don't make many sacks. They don't make many negative plays. They don't make many tackles for losses. They're getting better. They're playing hard, but they got to increase the talent there.
Yeah, I mean, as they're recruiting during the season, as everybody does, I mean, early in the year, those were some tough phone calls. But now they've got some momentum now. They've got some enthusiasm. It's a very cool story. I mean, they've done a really good job.
They lost some big-time talent on that defense off of last year. So, it takes a little time to get it back going. But it has been a great story. So that game is tonight. We got 5 more in the conference tomorrow. That includes the #1 team in the nation playing in primetime. Heisman contender Dylan Gabriel leading Oregon against Maryland. The action kicks off at 7 Eastern, 4 Pacific. It's here on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. We have a special pregame, which begins at 6 Eastern, 3 Pacific. They are the unanimous #1 team in the nation, #1 in the first CFP rankings. What do you guys believe has gotten them to this point after a little bit of a shaky start to the season?
Well, we always knew they wanted to play the game in space, right? I mean, that's been going on forever with the wide open offense and the spread attack with Oregon and the uniforms. I mean, they were one of the first ones to do that. But now they've become physical. When Coach Lanning was coming off the field last week against Michigan, and the sideline reporter asked, what did you think about the game? His quote was, I'll always start with how physical we were. And so to me, they've become a team that can play in space and also be very physical. Oddly enough, that's what Maryland wants to do, but obviously right now they don't have the players or maybe the system to do it.
Yeah, that was always the talk. Oh boy, the Big Ten, you better bring your mouthpiece. It's black and blue football, Big Ten football as compared to the Pac-12, right? It was Oregon throwing the ball around USC, UCLA, a little different scheme. Well, he made me a believer after that first game. And, the other thing, too, that, this staff, and we've talked about the players, all they're talking about is getting better every week, and they're growing as a team. After they had the big win with Ohio State, the next week they had to come and play Purdue. And I remember that, and we were sitting back saying they're going to travel. Everybody's patting each other on the back. It was a big national win, and they didn't miss a beat. That tells me that Dan Lenning and that staff, those guys were ready to play, Jer.
To talk about the expansion a little bit as the sidebar, I never bought into the fact that the Big Ten necessarily was more physical than the Pac-12. And when I went out and visited those schools during the camp tour, I was reinforced that I was right. The way it's turned out is USC is really the only team that has come on board of the 4 that isn't a physical team. I mean, Bieniemy's running a physical offense, right? We just talked about Dan Lanning.
Yep.
And Jed Fish, I mean, they're two tight ends. I mean, they're downhill. So it's interesting. USC is the one that is more pass than run and not as physical as the other three.
The one thing I'd say with UCLA is they struggled up front on offense at the beginning of the year. Like, philosophically, I think what you're saying is they want to be physical. They're not going to be wide open and crazy. They struggled to execute. They still have struggled to execute it in the run game. But you're saying philosophy.
I'm saying philosophically, right, that USC is the only one that you could say they don't look like a Big Ten team.
And it might be a little bit of Lincoln Riley still not totally committing or more committing to the run game. You know, just his philosophy might be the thing where these other guys said, hey, we know what we got to do to win.
How do you get this thing going again if you're Maryland? It's a tough spot to be in coming off a bye.
Well, I think what they want to do is the right scheme, I think, on both sides. They're inconsistent. You know, I didn't think they started off the season with great intensity. I don't know. I didn't go to camp, so I didn't.
I did. I thought they had I mean, we love them in camp.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
It just seems something's missing. Sometimes it's chemistry. You know, sometimes it has nothing to do with football. It could be chemistry. It could be leadership on the team. But
It's not that good defensively. I mean, that's what's weird to me is that this defense, you know, Brian Williams done a really nice job.
Yes.
They were getting better defensively, and just something is missing.
Right, something is missing.
And they got some stars. You know, Felton's as good a receiver as there is in a conference, I think. You know what I mean? They got a good running back. Edwards was good. I mean, I looked at their drives. I mean, 4th and 1, they don't make it. Then they turn it over. They go 3 and out. Then they throw a pick 6. I mean, how you got no chance?
You know what they say, when you can't put your finger on the problem, you got a real problem because you haven't identified what you have to fix. And that seems, when you watch them play, that seems what's going on.
I just felt like they have some momentum coming out of that USC game, and it just dissolved so quickly. Against Minnesota, and now you get a bye, but you go to Oregon, you go to the #1 team in the country. So no matter how good you, how much better you were during the bye, how well you did addressing your problems, I mean, it's not a great place to show it here at Autzen, but we will see tomorrow night.
We're living in the #8 for Indiana, and the CFP is not high enough.
Not fair. I think that they should be all the way up into the top 4. From down 10-0 to 47 consecutive points to keep that record perfect and 9-0.
Every week presents its own new set of circumstances, and so there's a lot of that going on this week. I'm aware of it.
Roll out a big red carpet touchdown, Indiana.
But to get kind of caught up on that and lose your focus would be the kiss of death.
Well, things are going quite well in Bloomington. They have matched a school record with 9 wins, all by double-digit margins. They're one of just 5 remaining unbeatens. Not only have they not lost a game, they've only lost 1 quarter all year. They trailed Michigan State 10-0 last week, and then they rattled off 47 straight points. And now they are considered the favorite against Michigan for the first time in the last 44 meetings between the two. And you think about the dichotomy of what we're looking at this week, right? You have Indiana, they were 3-9 a year ago. Nobody expected anything out of them. And here they are on a pace to make it to the college football playoff. You have Michigan, which won the national championship a year ago, and now they are fighting just to make it into a bowl. So I think the question is, how did we get here? Let's start with the Hoosiers. Like, what's going on here in this world that, if you would have told us a year ago this is where we were going to be, we would have told you were nuts.
Okay, so it starts with the coach, right? It starts with Scott Dolson, the AD at Indiana, hiring an unusual hire, a guy who's won everywhere. Google him, the whole operation with the older coach. So he knows what he wanted to do. I asked Harold Shelton, our researcher, tell me, how can we quantify what the JMU guys are doing for this team? And basically, it's 40% of their production. That's before the other transfers. That's not counting Rourke, right? He came from OU. So that is what he's done. He's a proven coach, and in this day and age, you can bring players, as we all know, through the portal. So that's how they got there.
Yeah, and I think just to piggyback off of that, talking to Mike Shanahan, their offensive coordinator, he says the players that we brought in had all been like they're starting for us, conference player. You know what I mean? I mean, they were top of the line players, and they didn't care about the level, you know, whether it was Georgia, you know, wherever. They didn't care. But all these guys were not experimental guys. They knew what they were getting. And the other point, we were talking in the green room, talking to Shanahan, you know, we were just talking about the same stuff. This was when they were here in town playing Northwestern. And he says, Coach, I've been with Coach Cignetti for 9 years. Mm-hmm. He says, if somebody fumbles a ball on the ground, as we talked, or jumps off sides, there's not 3 different opinions on the field. What are we going to do? Are we going to take them out of the drill? Are we going to have them run a lap? Are we going to make them run after practice? He says there's no discussion. There's no coaching the coaches. We know what Kurt wants. We've been doing it, and we saved a lot of time. When we got in the huddle and we broke and we come out of the meeting rooms, we're just talking about coaching the players. And I think there's probably something to that, you know?
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's amazing how good they are on both sides of the ball. I think that's the thing that struck me. I feel like sometimes when you have a coaching change, I'll bring in a new system, and wow, they're radically better on offense or radically better on defense. But to be radically better in both of them, they're first in the nation in rushing defense.
Yeah.
Negative 36 yards last week for Michigan State. I know it's distorted with the sacks, but 7 sacks. You know, I mean, like, let's just put it out there. I mean, they have been dominant on the lines of scrimmage, and so now you get Michigan. So the other side of this equation is, how did Michigan get here? And the one area where you feel like, okay, maybe they would have a chance to compete in this game is running the football. But these last couple of weeks, I mean, Kalel Mullings hasn't done much of anything. No. It feels like they've taken a step back there.
And you know, in defense of their defense, and Wink Martindale a little bit, I mean, last year, penalties, turnovers, they weren't a thing that Michigan ever had a concern about. So when you're not hurting yourself, you know, obviously you're going to be more productive on offense, but it also helps that defense a little bit from a field position standpoint. And the way this team started and kind of where they're at right now, you know, they've worked through it. I think this is what they were thinking they were going to be at quarterback, Michigan. I mean, I don't know how you could sit there and say, well, did you not anticipate this is how it was going to work? You know, you knew you liked Orji. You know, you needed a passer. He couldn't throw it. This couldn't have been a surprise to them in training camp here. I mean, they had to anticipate that when we were going to do it was going to be Davis Warren and it was going to be Alex Orji combination. And I think that's where they're at right now. And they got to play clean this week. Got to play clean if they want to have a chance of winning this game.
The only thing I would say is I think they would be in the same situation at Michigan even if they didn't have a coaching change. I think Jim Harbaugh. You look at Washington; they only had one starter. Both these teams played for the national championship. Jed Fish takes over at Washington with one starter on defense coming back, and that's it. And they played in the national championship. So the way these rosters have turned over so quickly, I think it's kind of coincidental. I don't think it's going to happen every year, but if Jim Harbaugh was at Michigan, he'd be playing with the same team. Yeah. Now, whether he would have managed the offseason different, I'm not sure he would have. I don't know. I think the roster would be the same.
6 guys, off of defense? Yeah, I mean, they've had a lot of guys leave too, like Washington, you know, and I think when I look at this game, we know who's playing the better football right now, okay? No question. Michigan has to get this game into the fourth quarter. You know, somehow, some way, they've got to control. You hate to say Michigan. I mean, it's Michigan. Take the air out of the football a little bit, slow it down. You know, keep that explosiveness of Indiana off the field. But if I could get this game, I'm thinking, if I can get this game into the fourth quarter, hey, now the pressure is on Indiana.
It's hard to do. I mean, the only game I can really think of that was the fourth quarter game was Northwestern, right? Northwestern got it to, I think, 3 points in the fourth quarter, and then Indiana put its foot on the gas. But they've been so good early in games. That's why last week was such an aberration that they just haven't been challenged. But they have finished games extremely well, too. It's just, man, it's an incredible story. I mean, it really is amazing. I marvel at it every week.
I'm worried that when the committee finally makes their decisions, that because Indiana's not a brand name, they're not going to get where they deserve. And
well, the comparison to Michigan last year is stunning. I mean, everything is essentially the same. Played a poor schedule. Michigan played a poor schedule, was dominant against that schedule. Michigan was the same way, and Michigan came in as the number 2 ranked team in the CFP. I mean, if you look at the numbers, it's staggering how close they are. So what was the difference? Well, the committee said we're watching them on the field, and they're crushing people, and we just think that they're, no matter what their schedule would have been, this is where they would be. I think that about Indiana, too. I'll have a chance to prove it here over the next couple games.
Hopefully what you opened up with by saying their national stats, leading them in the rush thing. You know, they're 4th in the nation in sacks. These aren't just Big Ten stats. No. These are national stats. Hopefully that carries some weight.
But there's 5 one-loss teams right now ranked ahead of them. Yeah. If their name wasn't in, if they were in Indiana, those 5 teams would not be ranked ahead of them.
I agree.
And so,
100%.
So the only way that you could really believe in this team is to watch them play and watch them on tape. And now you get back to the old argument that do they watch enough tape and do they have enough people watching the tape?
I know where you stand on that.
Yeah.
So Indiana is still undefeated. Penn State was undefeated until last week, of course, losing at home to Ohio State. And so now the question becomes, as they host Washington, Wani, how do you respond?
Well, you better respond quick because Washington, and we got to keep in mind, Jed Frisch is building from the foundation up there. You know, everybody wants to see this football team be like the Oregon, for example. Well, they're not. They're kind of where you were just talking about Michigan, Jer, and this is what you got because of graduation in the portal and in the national championship run last year. So he's building from the ground up. He's building his culture, the foundation. I would just say that Penn State better. We talk about being disappointed that we didn't see enough explosive plays out of Penn State last week. Well, I'll tell you what, this Washington team, since I saw them the first week, they got explosive players. You know, at the running back position, I mean, at the receiver position, Will Rogers is as good a quarterback as we got. Really, you know, I mean, around, he's playing good. And that defense with Steve Belichick, I mean, they've gotten better. You know, they're not making as many big plays, but boy, they are sound. They're doing some good things.
The formations that Jed gives a defense really neutralizes them. I mean, he gets balanced, 2 tight ends, 2 flankers, or 4 wide receivers, and he just leaves the 5 offensive linemen in the box. I mean, he has a reputation of being a very good play caller. I think it's well deserved. I mean, he really is hard to defend. Too many penalties, and you know they're a little bit undisciplined at times. You know, and he's a process guy. He uses that word a lot. And I really believe it. I mean, there's no panic in him. I mean, I think he just takes it as it comes, and I think they're really a well-coached team. The Penn State, by the way, why is Penn State ranked ahead of Indiana? Okay, I mean, same conference, Indiana's undefeated. Penn State's got a loss. But I get off on that tangent a little bit because of the committee. Last week, you know, Bo Bueller, not part of the game plan.
Pretty much.
Yeah, that was strange. That was really strange to me.
It really was. Almost as if maybe he had an injury and they didn't want to make it public.
But he played a little, right?
Played a little.
Very curious.
You know, one thing I'll be curious with James Franklin. Everybody up there, you know, the wheels are off. You know, the sky's falling. But we didn't see the big explosive plays that we thought we'd see, run or pass. What does he do this week? Does he come back and say, hey, we're going to get back with our running backs and we're going to start pounding this ball again like we did early in the year and we're going to take control of the line of scrimmage? Or are they going to open it up and get into a shootout?
Their other problem is they have no threats on the outside.
That's the issue. There's no one who scares you.
No.
A wide receiver, right? And so that's why it's become
Tyler Warren.
Tyler Warren.
Yeah. They took him away.
It's I mean, the one area where Washington's really good, like their pass defense is really good. So I don't know that you solve that issue this week against Washington. It seems to me that the way to do it is running the ball and being creative with Warren and getting back to the stuff that got them to where they were earlier in the year. IHOP Big Stat focusing on the Ducks and their 9-0 start. It is the 3rd best streak to start a season in school history, trailing only the 2010 and 2012 teams that featured a star running back by the name of Kenjon Barner. And speaking of, Kenjon Barner joins us now for our big interview. He will be joining the Tailgate crew tomorrow. He is also the host of the Ducks of a Feather podcast, which talks about all things Oregon football. Kenjon, really appreciate you joining us. We were talking there about some of the great teams you were on at Oregon. So compare this current team to some of those teams that you starred on.
First, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure. Glad to be here with you. But getting to this team, this is a team that Oregon has never seen before. Even going back to my time and a little bit before that, the depth that this team has, the talent that this team has, the athleticism that this team has, and the size. This is something that the University of Oregon has never seen. So I won't dare try and compare apples to oranges. This is just a different beast, a different animal. And I'm super excited to see what's taking place this season.
Well, I am going to make a comparison, so maybe you don't want to do it, but I will. One thing, I've said this a number of times on our air, I think for a lot of Big Ten fans, the image of Oregon football coming into this year was probably, certainly for me, I thought back to that first college football playoff national championship game when Ohio State played Oregon. And it was a mismatch at the line of scrimmage. Oregon just wasn't there. The speed and the athleticism and the offense, frankly, the scheme was amazing. The players were amazing, but they just couldn't compete with Ohio State on the line. And then when I found out Oregon was joining the Big Ten, I watched them a lot more closely last year. DVR'd games, watched them back, tried to get a sense for them, and I was blown away by how different they were on the line of scrimmage, by how much they had improved. So to me, when I compare when you played to now, would you say that that is a fair comparison, that interior is dramatically different than it was then?
1,010%.
Okay.
It goes back to what I was talking about in relation to the size. Our teams back then, that's where we lost games. That's where we struggled. We couldn't hang in the trenches, whether it's offensively or defensively. We're just overpowered and overmatched. This team is so big. This team is so powerful. This team is so physical from a defensive front end and offensive line standpoint. This team is really kind of dominating the Big Ten right now. And it's as a fan, it's beautiful to see, but I'm like, I wish I could have had something like this back when we were playing.
It's also a team. It's a team that hasn't just gotten better over the last decade on that front. You look at just in the course of this year, and you think back to those first couple of games against Idaho and Boise State. Now, Boise State turns out to be a very good team, one that might end up in the college football playoff. But the offensive line was fitting those new pieces together, and it felt like a little bit of a challenge. This is a team that's gotten way better as the year's gone on the line. To what do you attribute that?
If we're talking offensive line, it was moving Poncho to center. As soon as that move was made, you've seen a completely different level of play from this offensive line. They're more together, and again, they're physical. They're dominating games. They're controlling the line of scrimmage. But I would accredit that strictly to that one. It's like a puzzle. If you're missing that one missing piece in the middle, the puzzle's good for nothing. But as soon as you find it and you put it together, it completes the puzzle. And that was Poncho. That's what he was. Once he moved to center, that completely changed the dynamic. It completely changed the identity of this offense. And now we're seeing this team continually trend in the right direction.
Hey, bigger picture, Kenjon, what has made Dan Lanning the right fit for this program?
Who he is as a man. I can't harp enough on that. Anytime I talk to Dan, I'll call him DTM. We're on a nickname basis now, okay? So it's DTM, Dan the man. But who he is as a man, when you have in your head, man, somebody, one who's a man of their word, someone who honors their word, someone who means exactly what they say and says what they mean, that makes a world of a difference. As a player, you just want somebody that you can trust. And as a fan base, you want somebody that you can trust, and Dan is exactly that. He loves these kids. He's for these kids, and he wants what's best for them. He doesn't lie to them. He gives them the truth, tells them exactly what it is. And I think that's what makes him the right man for this job, because this city of Eugene, this is a loving, this is a caring place. This is a honorable place, in my opinion. And one of the reasons why I chose to come here, and Dan epitomizes exactly what this community is, and this team is his identity.
I am interested in what got you to Oregon. You're a Southern California kid. You grew up, I know, a big USC fan. Tell me about your first impressions of Oregon during recruitment.
It was cold and rainy. That was the first. I don't know why I committed here, to tell you the truth, because when I committed, again, it was about 40 degrees and a rainstorm. And then I heard the announcer say over the speakers, "It never rains in Austin Stadium." I'm kind of looking around like, they must not see what I see. They must not feel what I feel. Outside of that, again, you expect the football program to roll out the red carpet for you, to make you feel like a king, to make you feel like you're the only person that they desire. But for me, it was the community. It was getting around this community, walking around, everybody talking, hey, how you doing? But genuinely caring about how you're doing. It wasn't just conversation just to have conversation. It was people that wanted to know you, wanted to talk to you, and that was different for me. So it was a community that really got me committed to Oregon.
Those offenses were so dynamic that you were a part of, and Chip Kelly gets a ton of credit for that, justifiably. Tell me about playing for Chip and the creativity offensively that you were able to be a part of.
That was some of the most fun I had throughout my entire football career, whether it be high school, junior All-American, the NFL, because you just knew he was going to put together a game plan and put you in position to succeed. I'll give you an example of the mind of Chip. We were playing Oregon State in 2012, my senior year. We had been running outside zone, outside zone, outside zone. Chip calls a timeout. This is late in the fourth quarter. He says, we're lined up. Let me set the stage. We're lined up. We're about to run the play. He calls a timeout, calls me to the sideline. He said, listen, as soon as you get this ball, I want you to cut back. I'm like, this is mid-zone. We go outside. He said, are you going to trust me? I said, okay, I trust you. Snap the ball. As soon as I get the ball, I cut back, look up. I'm 52, 53 yards down the field. That's Chip. His creativity, his ingenuity, and his mind for the game was just something that I've never been around at that particular point in time. It was just a lot of fun to play up under Chip because, again, you knew he was going to draw up something crazy, and you knew it was going to be a high-scoring game.
You and LaMichael James were such a dynamic tandem together. Describe that relationship.
That's my brother. Me and LaMike have been there for each other through some of our darkest days, some of our happiest days, saddest days. That is my brother. It's very rare that someone that you're in competition with, you develop the type of bond and relationship that me and LaMichael did. My family loves him. His family loves me. Again, like I said, that is my brother. And then from a football standpoint, we pushed each other. If I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do, LaMike was going to pull my coattail and tell me, hey, bro, get it together. I need you. And vice versa. If he wasn't doing what he was supposed to do, and Mike, come on, bro, get it together. Like, what are we doing here? So having somebody that was my brother, that was one of my best friends, for us to go out there and do what we did, memories that will last a lifetime, moments that I'll forever remember.
You went on to win 3 Super Bowl rings. I know you gave one of those rings to your dad. What did that mean to you?
It meant everything. My dad is my biggest fan. You know, my family, they all support me, but my dad is my biggest fan. There's no one who is more proud of me than my dad. It kind of gets uncomfortable sometimes that my dad is so proud of me because it's like we'll be somewhere and he's just telling everybody, oh, this is my son. I'm like, Daddy, come on, just. He's got a proud father. So to be able to give that to my dad never missed a college game. The first time my dad ever missed a game was when I went to the NFL and played for the Carolina Panthers just because of the distance. He was at every single game, didn't miss a game, whether it was home or away. And my dad went through a lot with my brothers and myself and, me getting into trouble in school and almost blowing opportunities and it all working out. But my dad being there every single step of the way. I tell people all the time, I didn't have a dad, I had a father. And to have a man like that in my life and be able to give him something like that is something that I'm forever grateful and thankful for because it's not too often that, you can give your father a Super Bowl ring. And luckily I had 2 more.
It's not the only one, right? Yeah.
Not the only one.
That would have been a tough call there. Hey, let me ask you, last thing, you're in the podcasting world now, as I mentioned, the Ducks of a Feather podcast. What made you decide to get in that world and tell people a little bit about the pod?
So Ducks of a Feather came about through Adam and a friend of mine who also played at Oregon, Garen Strong. Funny story, myself and Jonathan Stewart, I was on a podcast that he was doing, I want to say almost last year sometime. And at the end of that pod, we kind of got on the phone and we're talking. It's like, at some point in time, we're going to do something together. We don't know what it is or how it's going to come about, but we're going to do something. Fast forward a couple months later, we're getting a call to do this podcast, and it was a no-brainer for me. I love this university, I love this football team, and I love football, and so does Jay Stu. So for us to be able to come together, talk about all things Ducks, but also keep it real and authentic and be honest and truthful in our opinion, I couldn't ask for a better thing to be doing right now. It's a lot of fun. It's enjoyable. And I get to do it with one of my best friends. And so anytime you can work with a best friend and you show your personality and kind of bounce off of each other, it's a beautiful experience.
Well, Kenjon, really fun to get a chance to talk to you. We're excited to have you on our airwaves, not just today, but tomorrow, as I mentioned, on Tailgate as well. Thanks for giving us a few minutes of your time.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Ohio State and Purdue tomorrow, a tale of two very different teams. The Bucks outscoring their opponents by nearly 26 points per game on average. The Boilers are being outscored by more than 16. You see some massive differences in terms of yardage as well. The series between them has been dominated by the Bucks. Tomorrow will be the 60th meeting. Purdue has just 15 wins. Ohio State figures to win easily tomorrow. So how do they avoid a letdown coming off the emotional win against Penn State?
This is this year's Virginia Tech. Do you remember when Ohio State won the national championship?
Yep.
They lost to Virginia Tech. I maintain if they didn't lose to Virginia Tech, they would not have won the national championship. I say the same thing about this team. The loss to Oregon is going to prevent them from coming out flat tomorrow, and it might propel them to win the rest of their games. So in a way, the Oregon loss may have been the exact thing this team needed. How often do you hear a team that the coach allows them to say national championship or bust? It's the kiss of death. No coach in their right mind would let the players talk like that. But it happened, and if the Oregon thing didn't happen, that may have been the worst thing, because now I think they're more focused than ever on their goal, and they're not talking about it as much, which I think is a better environment.
Yeah, and in the way they won that Penn State game, the physicality and running the ball, holding it for 5+ minutes and just running it, not throwing the ball. I think when you have a game like this, if you're a wide open team and you're throwing it 50 times a game, that's when guys can drop balls and lose some focus, and ball gets tipped and gets intercepted, on and on and on. But when you can run the football and you beat a team like Penn State with the physicality, to me, you come into this game and hey, that's a good way to kind of set the game, set the foundation, running the football. A lot less bad things can happen, and it kind of gets your juices running a little bit up front. So I think they got the formula to do it because of running the ball and their defense. I mean, it's probably the best defense, which probably not being talked about as much. But when you look at what they're doing, I mean, they are fantastic at situation defense, Jerry. You know what I mean? Goal line, they make a stop. Red zone, they give up, nothing. 1 out of 3 times they get a field. I mean, these guys are playing together as a team, as good a defense as anybody in the country.
But they changed. They changed after the Oregon game. And Ryan Day, this is really interesting, I think. When Ryan Day gave up the play calling to Chip, he had total confidence in Chip, right? And last week, before the Penn State game, Ryan went to the defensive meeting room, and he says, I'm here to give you input on how an offensive coach looks at what you guys are doing, meaning Jim Knowles and the staff. And they changed. They made changes. And this is why when a head coach takes on, when a head coach is a play caller at a power, not at a smaller school, but at a national championship type school, it never works out. They eventually give up the play calling because they can't solve problems.
Opposite of what Purdue's doing, right? Ryan
Well,
he's calling plays.
Right? It was just such a dire situation. It is interesting because Ryan has talked about this, that part of the luxury of hiring Chip was that he could worry more about the big picture, to be more of a CEO, and that manifested itself last week. So two teams heading in opposite directions there. It is not quite as pronounced with Minnesota and Rutgers, but has a similar vibe. Gophers have won 4 in a row. Knights have lost 4 in a row. Minnesota averaging nearly 30 points per game in that stretch. Rutgers, meanwhile, has really fallen apart on D. They're allowing more than 33 points per game during their skid. Let's focus on Minnesota first. What have you seen as they've hit their stride?
They're a balanced offense now, which they've never been since PJ has been there. The one thing I think all of PJ's teams have showed us is they improve as the year goes on. I mean, he really does a really good job of putting his team in position to improve as the season goes on. But Brosma giving them the ability to be a balanced offense, has really changed their team and changed the way they play the game.
And a new defensive coordinator, right? He comes in, and it's early on they were struggling. 3 out of the last 4 games, 17 points or less. So that defense all of a sudden's come alive. So you said it, complete team, got to include the defense in with that.
Yeah, the defense is really back to being elite. I mean, they've given up 20 points or more just 3 times this year. It happened 9 times last year. I mean, it's just, this is what you would expect from a PJ Fleck defense. We just didn't see it last year. How does Rutgers get back on track?
By winning this game. You know, to keep it simple. I mean, number one. Well, this now with Rosemeyer, I mean, that puts a little different picture on this thing. It's not the old run the ball. If you can take away the run with Minnesota, we got them where we want them. Make them one-dimensional. I mean, now and PJ Fleck, hey, with Kelly McManus, the quarterback who obviously went from Minnesota, he's now at Rutgers, and now PJ's got a new quarterback. He's going to want to make this kid shine a little bit. So, I mean, I look for them to try to open it up maybe a little bit more than they have. I think Rutgers got to be ready for this quarterback because I think he, in PJ's mind, could be the difference in this game.
So Kyle Monangai rushed for over 100 yards 3 of the first 4 games, and they were 4-0. He's rushed for once in this losing streak. So what I see is Monangai, they've had the week off. Maybe everybody's a little bit more healthy because they were really a banged-up football team. But the experiment, I don't know if you call it an experiment, but the goal of Kaliak Manis bringing more pass game to Rutgers really hasn't worked out. And so with that and the stat that I said, when Monangai rushes for 100, they usually win. When he rushes for less than 100, they usually lose. And a week off, I see this looking like maybe last year's Rutgers offense, not this year's.
I hope he's healthy. I mean, he was banged up in the USC game, so hopefully that week
he's healthy.
Gave him a week to
and that
heal
could
up.
maybe help the whole Rutgers team. Hopefully they get a couple guys back with this bye, health-wise.
But to your point, Jerry, they're 0-4 when Kaliak Manis throws 30 or more passes. They're 4-0 when he attempts less than 30. So if they can run the ball, they are successful.
Absolutely.
The
That's at home.
And it's mentee, you know, there's a lot of emotion there.
Yeah, a lot of
emotion.
guys who are on one staff and now are on the other. And
Quarterback,
the cross-pollination. Big day at USC yesterday, breaking ground on its new Bloom Football Performance Center. The new facility will serve as the home of Trojan football, scheduled to open in the summer of 26. Features 2 full-length outdoor practice fields, plus 160,000 square feet of indoor space, which will include new locker rooms and meeting rooms. The training facility, not the only thing that's new at SC. They have a new starting quarterback as well. Miller Moss benched in favor of UNLV transfer Jade Mayava. SC becomes the 4th Big Ten school to move on from its Week 1 starter, although it's fair to point out Cade McNamara, Tyler Van Dyke have been injured. Michigan, of course, back to its opening day starter in Davis Warren. They tried 2 others. So there's been a lot of movement. How tough is this as a coach? Wani, you guys have both been in this spot, but I'll give you the first word on this. How tough is this as a coach to make a midseason move?
Well, it's not easy. It's not easy because usually your quarterback is going to be your leader. You know, he's going to be a kid that's well-liked for the most part on your team. And I think coaches make it, you know, when I've been involved, is the kid making bad decisions? Is he turning the ball over? That's one category. Or in USC's position with Miller Moss, the talk of this week, you know, he was kind of a game manager in my mind. They were going to run the ball, and I don't think they were counting on him to win games week in and week out. And now all of a sudden they're pressed. So I think Lincoln's looking at it and says, does the new guy give me a chance to score more points and be a little bit more, you know, over the top as far as making big plays?
The reason you change quarterbacks is the same reason you change the right guard, performance. The difference is that the position is so much more important than what the right guard's doing. But it really comes down to that, right? How good are you playing? Decisions. To me, the toughest decision for the quarterback position as a coach is when you're picking a starting quarterback. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily when you make a decision in midseason. When you're picking a first-time starter and you haven't allowed him to be hit during scrimmages in preparation, then you don't know how he's going to react in the game. But to me, again, I don't think it's any different than benching another player, except there's more at stake when you do it.
You'd like to have one. I'd use J.J. McCarthy. Can my quarterback, if we're down by 10, take me down the field and score in the last 6 minutes? That's what you'd like to have. Most of these guys are game managers, and you get caught up like this.